So take a quick glance at your watch.
Or, the clock on your phone or your dashboard.
Right, whatever's closest to you right now. Just look at the time. 1 minute is 60 seconds. 1 hour is 60 minutes.
Yeah.
It's like so ingrained in how we experience reality, how we organize our entire lives, that we never stop to ask the obvious question, which is, why 60?
Right. Why not 10 or 100? It's a massive blind spot in our daily lives.
Exactly.
Because we operate on a base 10 system for almost everything else,
Yeah.
right? I mean, our currency, our metric measurements, our basic counting system, it's all built on 10s, largely because, well, we have 10 fingers.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But the moment we interact with the fabric of time or geometry or navigation, we suddenly switch to a base 60 system.
And the answer to why we do that, it isn't found in some modern laboratory.
No, definitely not.
And it didn't come from like a medieval European university either. The answer takes us back roughly 4,000 years to a city situated in the desert mud of what is today Iraq.
A city that, didn't just give us the mechanics of how we measure time, but secretly programmed the way you live your life today.
Yeah, today we're taking a deep dive into Babylon, but not the myth, not the biblical caricature. We're looking at the actual geopolitical machine.
The real thing.
Right. We want to understand how a city between two rivers essentially engineered human civilization's operating system, how it dictated our concepts of justice, our religious structures, and applied mathematics.
Because Babylon wasn't just a physical place with brick walls. I mean, it was that, but it was really a conceptual framework.
Like a blueprint.
Exactly, a blueprint for how to run a society.
Yeah.
When most people hear the name Babylon, they picture this isolated aesthetic, maybe a passage from a religious text or some massive Hollywood set with golden idols.
Right, like totally decadent and ancient.
Yeah, but the historical reality is this sweeping arc from its muddy, incredibly violent beginnings to its, silent assimilation into the modern world.
We're basically dealing with an invisible architecture that survived the collapse of its own physical empire.
Beautifully put.
So, to understand how they built that architecture, we really have to look at the geographical paradox they were dealing with.
Right, Mesopotamia.
Yeah, the land between the rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. And the defining feature of this real estate is that it was simultaneously this biological jackpot and an absolute nightmare.
It was an environment of terrifying extremes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, on one hand, you have the rivers originating up in the mountains of Turkey, flowing downward and depositing this incredibly fine, nutrient-rich silt across the southern plains.
The soil was basically magic.
Oh, the agricultural yield was astonishing. We actually have surviving administrative records showing that planting a single seed of barley or wheat could yield up to 200 times the crop.
Wait, really? 200 to 1?
Yes. That ratio is absurd. I mean, it absolutely eclipsed the average agricultural yield in Europe at the time. You plant one seed, you get 200 back.
Wow. But of course, the flip side of that fertility is the unpredictability. Because this wasn't the Nile. The Nile flooded on a neat, reliable schedule that you could basically set a calendar to. The Tigris and Euphrates were violently erratic.
Violently is the right word.
Yeah, like a flood could come at the absolute wrong time, wiping out a harvest right before it could be reaped. Or it could be a massive deluge that literally swept entire villages off the map in a single afternoon.
Or, and this is just as fatal, the rivers might not flood at all.
Right, causing a drought.
Exactly, plunging the whole region into a devastating famine.
Mm-hmm.
If you are an ancient farmer living in that environment, your baseline reality is constant existential anxiety.
Just waiting for the water to either kill you or save you.
Yeah. And that anxiety is precisely the catalyst for human civilization.
Mm-hmm.
Because you cannot survive that kind of environmental oscillation as a lone family unit or even a small nomadic tribe.
You have to work together.
You have to control the water, you have to capture the floodwaters when they come, store them, and then, redirect them during the dry seasons.
Which requires massive engineering. I mean, you have to build huge canal networks.
And think about the sheer mechanics of digging a regional canal system in the ancient world. You don't just grab a shovel and start digging.
Right, you need a plan.
You need surveyors to calculate the gradient so the water actually flows. You need standardized rations to feed the hundreds of laborers doing the digging.
Oh yeah, you have to feed all those people.
Exactly. You need overseers to manage the labor, and you need a central authority to resolve disputes when, say, one farmer accuses another of siphoning off too much water.
So the absolute necessity of controlling those rivers essentially forced humans to invent complex, organized, hierarchical society.
It was adapt or die.
And you add to that the fact that this incredibly wealthy, fertile land had zero natural defenses. I mean, no mountain ranges ringing the plains, no oceans protecting the flanks.
It's just a wealthy target sitting in the middle of an open plain.
Exactly. So you constantly have external invaders sweeping in. But here's the fascinating part from the source. Instead of the region being destroyed by this revolving door of conquerors, it acted like a cultural sponge.
Yeah, the assimilation is incredible.
The invaders would arrive, conquer the territory, and then just be completely absorbed by the local operating system.
And the foundational architects of that operating system were the Sumerians.
Mm-hmm.
They emerged in the southern part of this region around 4500 BCE.
The Sumerians are so fascinating to me.
They are a true historical enigma. I mean, their language is an isolate. It has no known linguistic relatives anywhere else in the world.
Wait, none at all?
None. But what they accomplished, mechanically and socially, basically set the stage for everything that followed. They built the world's first true urban centers, cities like Uruk, and Lagash.
And when we say cities, we really need to emphasize that we're not talking about oversized villages here.
No, not at all.
The archaeological footprint of Uruk suggests that at its peak, it housed anywhere from 50,000 to 80,000 people.
Which is staggering.
Try to wrap your head around the logistics of that. How do you feed, water, and sanitize a population of 80,000 people without modern technology?
You do it through intense centralization. And that was physically manifested in the ziggurats.
The big stepped pyramids.
Right, these massive terraced temple complexes. But they weren't just places of worship. They were the administrative hubs, the central grain silos, and the real economic engines of the city.
But to run an operation, that massive human memory is no longer sufficient.
No, you hit a limit fast.
We can't just remember who contributed their share of the grain harvest and who didn't.
Which leads directly to what I consider the Sumerians' greatest gift to humanity, right around 3500 BCE, cuneiform.
The invention of the world's first hard drive.
Yeah, I think framing it as a hard drive is highly accurate, especially when you look at how it evolved. Cuneiform didn't start out as a tool for writing poetry.
No, it was basically an Excel spreadsheet.
Exactly. It evolved from physical accounting tokens. Originally, if you had, say, 5 sheep, an administrator might put 5 little clay shapes representing sheep into a hollow clay ball, seal it, and bake it.
Okay, a physical receipt.
Right. But then someone realized, why are we breaking open clay balls to check the inventory? Let's just scratch a picture of the 5 sheep on the outside of the wet clay.
And then the conceptual leap happens. They realize they don't even need the tokens inside the ball anymore. The picture scratched on the clay is enough.
Yes, and over centuries, drawing literal pictures of sheep or grain in wet clay with a little stylus becomes tedious. Curves are really hard to draw in mud.
So they simplify it.
Exactly. The scribes started abstracting the images into patterns of straight, wedge-shaped marks, which is actually what cuneiform means, wedge-shaped.
Oh, interesting.
And then they realized these wedges could represent not just physical objects, but syllables and phonetic sounds.
And that right there is the technological singularity of the ancient world. Because once you can record phonetic sounds, your inventory software suddenly becomes capable of storing human thought.
It changes everything.
You can write down laws, you can write down history, you can record complex myths. I mean, without that, civilization has no permanent memory.
Right. A society without writing is essentially suffering from collective amnesia every 3 generations.
Cuneiform made ideas immortal.
But, while the Sumerians had the technology and the massive cities, they actually lacked unification.
Oh, right. They were always fighting.
Yeah, they were a landscape of fiercely independent, constantly warring city-states. The paradigm didn't shift until around 2334 BCE, with Sargon of Akkad.
Oh, sorry.
He forged the world's first centrally governed empire, uniting these disparate cities under the Akkadian language.
What really fascinates me about Sargon is how his life was immediately mythologized to legitimize his massive centralization of power.
The origin story.
Yeah. The legend states he was born in secret, placed in a reed basket sealed with pitch, and floated down the river, only to be rescued by a humble gardener.
And eventually he rises to become the emperor of the known world.
Right. It's the ultimate archetypal hero's journey, and it predates the story of Moses by centuries.
It demonstrates that early Mesopotamians fully understood the power of narrative to solidify political authority.
Sargon's empire proved that a massive centralized state could exist, even though his specific dynasty collapsed after a few generations.
Yeah, it led to a period of fragmented chaos until a new group entered the geopolitical stage around 2000 BCE, the Amorites.
The Amorites, they were nomadic tribes coming from the western deserts, right?
Right. And the established Sumerian and Akkadian elites completely despised them.
Oh, yeah. The surviving texts literally describe them as uncultured barbarians who don't know what a house is and eat raw meat.
But the Amorites systematically infiltrated and took over the weakening city-states anyway. And here we see that assimilation dynamic perfectly.
They didn't just burn everything down.
Exactly. The Amorites didn't force everyone to live in tents. They realized the Mesopotamian system was incredibly efficient. So they learned Akkadian, they adopted the local pantheon of gods, and they seamlessly integrated into the administrative bureaucracy.
And some of these Amorites settled in a minor, strategically located town called Babalu,
which translates from Akkadian as Gate of the Gods.
And over time, linguistic shifts gave us the name Babylon.
There it is. But for a while, Babylon is just another mid-tier player on the map. It has a string of capable but pretty unremarkable Amorite kings.
Until the sixth king of the dynasty takes the throne, Hammurabi.
Hammurabi.
And this guy is a mastermind. When he takes power, he's estimated to be around 18 to 20 years old.
There we go.
Right. In the ancient world, you hand an 18-year-old absolute power and an army, and you expect immediate, disastrous wars of ego. But Hammurabi plays the longest, coldest game imaginable.
He essentially puts his military on ice for the first 30 years of his reign.
30 years.
Yeah, he understood that a king's power projection abroad is only as strong as his logistical base at home. So he spends 3 decades obsessively building his infrastructure.
Like the canals.
He digs new, massive canal networks to maximize the agricultural surplus. He fortifies the city walls, and he focuses heavily on diplomacy.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second. We think of ancient kings as pure warmongers. But reading about Hammurabi's diplomatic maneuvering, he sounds more like a mob boss playing rival families against each other.
That's a great analogy. Just look at the geopolitical board he was playing on. You had the powerful Assyrian kingdom to the north, Elam to the east in modern Iran,
the wealthy city of Larsa to the south,
the vital trade hub of Mari to the west, which was ruled by his close ally and frequent correspondent, Zimri-Lim.
So Babylon is basically surrounded by bigger threats.
Exactly. So Hammurabi spends 30 years writing letters, brokering treaties, and sharing intelligence, all while quietly building his economic and military reserves.
And then, in his 30th year on the throne, he just unleashes everything. He decides it's time to take the board, and the sequence of his betrayals is staggering.
He begins by targeting Larsa in the south, but he doesn't do it alone. He forms a military coalition with Elam from the east.
A team up.
Right. Together, they crush Larsa, and Hammurabi secures the southern agricultural heartland. But the sheer cunning of Hammurabi is revealed the moment Larsa falls.
Oh, this part is wild.
With his army already mobilized and Elam's forces likely depleted from the campaign, he immediately turns his combined forces around and attacks his own ally, Elam.
He uses Elam as a battering ram, and the second the door breaks down, he shoots the guy holding the ram.
It's ruthless.
It really is. But the betrayal that defines his total lack of sentimentality is what he does to Mari.
Yes. Mari was ruled by Zimri-Lim, who had been Hammurabi's ally and diplomatic brother for decades. I mean, we have massive archives of their correspondence.
They were close.
They were. But Mari controlled the vital western trade routes along the Euphrates. It was an independent node of power, which Hammurabi's new vision of total dominance could no longer tolerate.
So what does he do?
Around 1861 BCE, Hammurabi invades Mari. And he doesn't just conquer it to absorb its wealth. He orders the systematic dismantling of its walls and the burning of the city.
To spend 30 years calling a man your brother, coordinating with him, sending gifts, and then to wipe his city off the face of the earth.
Cold calculation.
It shows a level of strategic calculation that is genuinely terrifying. He wasn't conquering for glory, he was eliminating variables.
And once he eliminated all the variables, Babylon was the undisputed center of a massive empire.
But of course, conquering an empire and running an empire are two very different skill sets.
Which brings us to his greatest administrative tool. How do you standardize the behavior of hundreds of thousands of people across vast distances, many of whom have different local customs?
You codify the rules.
It's exactly. In 1901, archaeologists in Susa uncovered this massive black basalt stele, over 2 meters tall, and carved into this stone is the Code of Hammurabi.
282 distinct laws covering everything from murder to the minimum wage for a bricklayer.
Yes.
Now, we have to clarify this because pop history often gets this wrong. This was not the first written set of laws.
Correct. The Code of Ur-Nammu, for instance, predates Hammurabi by several centuries. But Hammurabi's code is unique in its comprehensiveness and in its philosophical shift in how punishment was applied.
It regulated property disputes, marital rights, debt slavery, professional liability.
The professional liability laws are what really jump out. This is the origin of an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, proportional justice.
And the mechanics of it are incredibly direct. The text literally states that if a builder constructs a house and that house collapses and kills the homeowner, the builder's put to death.
Right.
But then it says if the collapse kills the homeowner's son, the builder's son is put to death.
To a modern observer, the idea of executing a builder's innocent son is repulsive. I mean, it feels like pure barbarism.
It really does.
But you have to view this through the lens of what it was replacing. Prior to this, Mesopotamian legal systems largely operated on a system of financial compensation.
Like blood money.
Exactly. If a wealthy man killed a poor man or destroyed his property, the wealthy man simply paid a fine. His wealth shielded him from any physical consequence.
Oh, wow. So an eye for an eye wasn't meant to be a license for brutal revenge. It was actually a radical attempt to enforce skin in the game.
Yes.
It's basically saying your money can no longer protect you from the physical consequences of your negligence. It was a primitive but revolutionary framework for professional accountability.
That's right. However, we do have to acknowledge the strict limitations of this equality.
Yeah.
The code legally codified 3 rigid social tiers.
Okay, what were they?
You had the Elam, the free upper class, the Mushkinum, the dependent or lower class free citizens, and the Wardum, the enslaved class.
So justice wasn't totally blind.
Not at all. Proportional justice only applied laterally between members of the same class. If an Awilim blinded another Awilim, he lost his eye.
But if he blinded someone from a lower class?
If he blinded a Mushkinim, the lower class citizen, the punishment reverted right back to a simple silver fine. So the justice was proportional, but the value of a human life was strictly tiered by status.
That's a crucial distinction. But, the most powerful mechanism of the code wasn't even the specific punishments. It was the physical medium itself. He carved it into a giant piece of rock and put it in the center of the city.
The public permanence of the law is the pivotal innovation here. When a legal code is written down and displayed publicly, it transitions from being the arbitrary whim of a king to an objective standard.
It theoretically binds the state to its own rules.
Exactly. A literate citizen, or someone who hires a scribe, can look at the stone and know their exact rights.
But if you're Hammurabi, how do you enforce this? You don't have a modern police force to patrol an entire empire.
No, you need psychological enforcement.
Mm-hmm.
You need the citizens to police themselves through fear of a higher power.
And that's exactly what the top of the basalt pillar provides, right? Above the written laws is a carving of Hammurabi standing before Shamash, the sun god and god of justice.
Yes, Shamash is literally handing Hammurabi the symbols of authority.
It's brilliant political marketing. He's saying, don't argue with me. These aren't my rules. I'm just the middleman for the sun god.
In Babylon, theology and statecraft were identical. The king's authority was absolute because it was divinely mandated. And this requirement for divine justification drove a fascinating theological evolution regarding their patron god, Marduk.
The rise of Marduk is the perfect case study in how human politics shape religious narratives.
Absolutely.
When Babylon was a minor Amorite town, Marduk was a minor, obscure local deity. But as Babylon's military and economic power expanded, Marduk's resume in the mythological texts started getting massive upgrades.
By the time Hammurabi is ruling the known world, Marduk isn't just a god. He is declared the absolute king of all the gods.
Because to justify ruling over other cities, Babylon needed to prove that its god ruled over the other cities' gods.
Right. And this ideological campaign reaches its absolute peak in the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian epic of creation.
Which was a massive deal for them.
It was a text so fundamental to their society that it was publicly recited every single year during the massive Akitu New Year festival.
And the story of the Enuma Elish is violent and incredibly cinematic.
It really is.
In the beginning, there's just two primordial entities, Apsu, representing fresh water, and Tiamat, representing the salt water of the oceans.
They mingle and spawn a generation of younger gods. But these younger gods are chaotic and noisy.
So noisy that Apsu gets annoyed.
Right. Apsu gets so annoyed by the racket that he actually plots to murder his own children.
Which is an intense parenting strategy.
Very intense. But the younger gods discover the plot, and the god of wisdom, Enki, assassinate Apsu first. And this act triggers a terrifying transformation in Tiamat.
The saltwater mother.
Yes. She shifts from a passive primordial mother into an active force of apocalyptic vengeance. She spawns an army of horrifying monsters, horned serpents, rabid dogs, scorpion men, and prepares to eradicate the younger gods.
And the younger gods are just utterly paralyzed by fear. None of them can stand against her.
Enter Marduk.
But Marduk doesn't just heroically charge into battle, right? He negotiates.
Exactly. He tells the terrified gods, I will slay Tiamat and save you, but my price is absolute supremacy. I become the undisputed king of the gods forever.
And they agree.
They agree. Marduk goes to war, he defeats Tiamat, and then he engages in this graphic act of cosmic architecture.
It's pretty brutal.
He splits Tiamat's massive body in half like a shellfish. He uses one half to build the dome of the sky and the other half to form the earth. Her weeping eyes literally become the sources of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers.
Wow.
And finally, Marduk creates humanity out of the blood of a traitor god, giving humans one singular purpose.
To do the hard labor so the gods can rest.
Exactly. And when you look at the mechanics of the Enuma Elish, it is pure, unadulterated political propaganda.
The narrative asserts that the natural state of the universe is chaos and destruction, embodied by Tiamat.
And the only way to survive that chaos is through immense, centralized, absolute authority embodied by Marduk.
Therefore, Babylon, as Marduk's chosen seat of power, is the only thing standing between civilization and total collapse.
It intellectually disarms any rebellion. If you rebel against Babylon, you aren't just fighting a king, you are fighting the order of the universe.
But Marduk wasn't the only psychological force in the city. You also have Ishtar. And the psychology of Ishtar is endlessly fascinating to me.
She is the goddess of both love and war.
Right. And to a modern mind, combining romance and combat seems completely contradictory. But in the ancient Mesopotamian mindset, the connection is obvious.
Both love and war are driven by an overwhelming, irrational, primal passion.
Exactly. They are forces that strip away logic.
Ishtar, who evolved from the Sumerian Anna, is an incredibly dynamic, often dangerous figure. She represents the raw, untamed forces of nature, and the most vital myth surrounding her is her descent into the underworld.
Which is ruled by her sister, Ereshkigal.
Yes, she goes down to the underworld, but there are rules. She has to pass through 7 gates, At each gate, the guardian forces her to strip off a piece of clothing or jewelry.
Which act as the physical manifestations of her divine power.
Right. By the time she reaches the center, she's completely naked, stripped of all her power, and her sister hangs her on a hook as a corpse.
And consider the mechanical consequence of her death. With the goddess of passion and fertility dead in the underworld, all biological reproduction on Earth halts.
Crops fail, animals cease mating, human fertility drops to zero. It is an existential crisis for the planet.
It's not just a cool story, you know. It's the first human attempt to psychologically process the trauma of winter. It's a coping mechanism for watching the world die every autumn and hoping desperately that Ishtar will be rescued so spring can return.
Exactly. But interacting with these divine forces required massive infrastructure. The temples in Babylon weren't just places where people sat quietly and prayed.
They were the economic engines of the empire.
The source material accurately compares them to Wall Street.
The Temple of Marduk, the Isagila, was essentially the Federal Reserve, a massive agricultural corporation, and the Supreme Court all rolled into one.
Look at the economics of a Babylonian temple. They controlled vast tracts of the most fertile land. They operated massive granaries, which acted as the state treasury, since grain was a primary currency.
Right, they employed thousands of people. Bakers, brewers, weavers, scribes.
And most importantly, they functioned as the primary financial institutions. If a merchant needed capital to fund a trading caravan to Anatolia, he went to the temple for a loan.
The priests calculated compound interest, managed the debt contracts, held the collateral.
And the priests held ultimate political leverage because they possessed a monopoly on divine communication. A Babylonian king wouldn't dare launch a military campaign without consulting the priests.
They practiced really elaborate divination.
Very elaborate. They would sacrifice an animal, extract its liver, and analyze the anomalies and bumps on the organ to decode the will of the gods.
Or tracking planetary movements.
Exactly. The king's geopolitical decisions were entirely dependent on the theological data provided by the priesthood.
It created a powerful symbiosis, but also a pretty dangerous vulnerability. If a king lost the support of the priests, he lost his divine mandate, and his regime was in peril.
Yeah.
And despite this complex web of legal, religious, and economic control, Hammurabi's empire was ultimately subject to the brutal realities of the Bronze Age. After his death, his successors faced mounting rebellions and shrinking borders.
It's a slow decay. But the actual kill shot comes out of nowhere in 1695 BCE.
The Hittites.
The Hittites from Anatolia.
These are a fierce people from modern-day Turkey. Their king, Mursili I, launches what is essentially an ancient geopolitical drive-by shooting.
Just a hit and run. Yeah, he leads his army down the Euphrates, smashes into a weakened Babylon, loots the temples, steals the sacred statue of Marduk, and then they just go home.
They didn't even want to stay.
They didn't want to occupy Babylon. They just wanted the gold and the glory of crippling it.
That massive raid completely shatters the Amorite dynasty. It creates a total power vacuum.
Yeah.
And stepping into that vacuum is one of the most enigmatic groups in ancient history, the Kassites.
The Kassites sweep in from the eastern mountains, likely modern Iran, and they end up ruling Babylon for 400 years, from roughly 1600 to 1200 BCE.
That is the longest uninterrupted dynasty in Babylonian history.
It is.
And the way they rule is astonishing. Think of it like a massive corporate acquisition where a smaller, scrappy company buys a legacy megacorporation, but instead of forcing their own culture onto the newly acquired company, the conquerors completely adopt the culture of the conquered.
It is the ultimate testament to the superiority of the Babylonian cultural operating system. The Kassites had the military force, but they realized that Babylon's administrative and religious frameworks were unparalleled.
So they just became Babylonian.
Basically.
Yeah.
The Kassite kings abandoned their own language for official state business and adopted Akkadian. They poured their own wealth into restoring the temples of Marduk. They took Babylonian names.
Within a few generations, the Kassite ruling class had actively erased their own cultural distinctiveness to become perfect Babylonians.
And they weren't just preserving the past, they innovated. It was during this Kassite period that Babylonian scholars finalized and edited the Epic of Gilgamesh into the definitive version we know today.
Wow, I didn't realize it was that late.
Yep. They also invented a crucial legal and economic tool, the kuduru.
The boundary stones, right?
A kuduru is a massive carved stone boundary marker. When the king granted a tract of land to a loyal servant or a temple, the details of the grant were carved into this stone.
Like a physical deed.
But it wasn't just a physical deed. It was covered in the symbols of the gods and inscribed with terrifying, elaborate divine curses directed at anyone, even a future king who might try to alter the boundaries, dispute the claim, or move the stone.
It weaponized theology to guarantee private property rights across generations. That's so smart.
The Kassites also elevated Babylon to a diplomatic superpower. We know this from the Amarna letters, a cache of diplomatic clay tablets found in Egypt.
These are the geopolitical back channels of the ancient world. You have Kassite kings of Babylon writing directly to the Egyptian pharaohs.
What's really revealing is the tone of the correspondence. The Babylonian kings address the pharaohs as brother. They treat each other as absolute equals on a global stage.
Haggling over trade, arranging marriages.
Yes, specifically Babylon demanding massive shipments of Egyptian gold in exchange for precious lapis lazuli and horses. It highlights a deeply interconnected, globalized Bronze Age economy where Babylon was a central pillar.
But the Bronze Age eventually collapses. Systemic failures sweep across the entire Mediterranean and Middle East. And looming to the north of Babylon is a terrifying militaristic machine that is about to define the next bloody chapter of history.
The Assyrian Empire.
The Assyrians, based in northern Mesopotamia along the Tigris. And they fundamentally revolutionized warfare. While Babylon was focused on commerce and scholarship, Assyria built a state dedicated to total military dominance.
They were the first major power to effectively deploy iron weapons on a massive scale.
And the mechanical advantage of iron over bronze cannot be overstated. Bronze is an alloy, it's relatively soft, and it bends under heavy impact.
Yeah.
Iron, when forged correctly, is incredibly hard.
In a battle line, an Assyrian iron sword will literally shatter a Babylonian bronze sword.
Furthermore, the Assyrians developed highly coordinated cavalry units and terrifyingly effective siege engines, massive battering rams and mobile towers that could tear down city walls.
The dynamic between Assyria and Babylon was essentially a toxic, violent sibling rivalry.
Yeah.
The Assyrians shared a linguistic and religious heritage with Babylon. They deeply revered Babylonian culture and viewed it as the intellectual capital of the world. Assyrian kings desperately wanted to rule Babylon, but they wanted to rule it as a compliant jewel in their crown.
But the Babylonians were incredibly arrogant about their cultural superiority. They absolutely refused to be subjugated.
So you get this brutal cycle spanning centuries. The Assyrian army marches south, crushes a Babylonian rebellion, installs a puppet governor, and marches home.
And the absolute second the Assyrian army crosses the horizon, the Babylonians assassinate the governor and rebel again.
It drove the Assyrian kings to madness.
This relentless cycle culminated in the reign of the Assyrian king Sennacherib. By 689 BCE, Sennacherib's patience was completely exhausted by yet another Babylonian revolt. He made a decision that shocked the entire ancient world.
He wasn't just going to defeat Babylon, he was going to erase it from the physical and historical record.
His destruction of the city was systematic and apocalyptic. He breached the walls. His troops went street by street, massacring the population. They systematically dismantled the temples and palaces.
He committed the ultimate theological atrocity by stealing the statue of Marduk and dragging it to Assyria.
And then he brought in engineers. He had them divert the local canals to flood the ruins, turning the greatest city on earth into a muddy swamp. He wanted it completely eradicated.
Sennacherib's own surviving inscriptions boasted this act with chilling pride. He claims he wiped out the city more thoroughly than a natural disaster.
But he grossly miscalculated the psychological impact of his actions.
He really did. Across the Mesopotamian world and critically within his own Assyrian priesthood, the annihilation of Babylon and the desecration of Marduk was viewed as an unforgivable cosmic crime.
He hadn't just destroyed a city, he had declared war on the gods.
The blowback was immediate and fatal. Sennacherib was assassinated by his own sons. And it's incredibly telling that the son who succeeded him, Esarhaddon, immediately initiates a massive project to rebuild Babylon. He was driven by absolute religious terror.
He clears the swamps, rebuilds the temples, returns the statue.
He tries to undo his father's sacrilege because the cultural gravity of Babylon was so intense that even his conquerors feared its ghost.
This resurrection set the stage for the collapse of Assyria and the rise of Babylon's most magnificent era, the Neo-Babylonian Empire. Assyria had overextended itself. Its brutal tactics had created a massive coalition of enemies.
Around 626 BCE, a Chaldean leader from the southern marshlands named Nabopolassar launched a massive rebellion.
But Nabopolassar isn't stupid. He knows his infantry can't defeat the massive Assyrian military machine head-on, so he looks east to the mountainous regions of modern Iran, where a people called the Medes are building a formidable army.
Under their king, Cyaxares.
Right. Nabopolassar forms a military alliance with the Medes to force Assyria into a two-front war. And to guarantee this alliance, he brokers a marriage. He marries his son, Nebuchadnezzar, to the Median princess, Amytis.
That alliance fundamentally rewrote the map of the Middle East. In 612 BCE, the combined Babylonian and Median forces marched on Nineveh, the supposedly impenetrable capital of the Assyrian Empire.
And they laid siege to it. According to ancient accounts, they utilized the environment itself, diverting the waters of the Tigris River to undermine the foundations of Nineveh's massive walls.
The walls breached, the armies poured in, and the Assyrian Empire was violently wiped from the pages of history.
And the power vacuum is entirely absorbed by Babylon. When Nabopolassar dies, his son Nebuchadnezzar II takes the throne. Here's where it gets really interesting. Nebuchadnezzar is infamous as a brutal military conqueror, but his true legacy, his absolute obsession, was architecture.
He decided to turn Babylon into the undeniable, gleaming center of the universe. He transformed it into a megacity of unprecedented scale. Estimates suggest the population swelled to over 200,000 people.
200,000. Think about the administrative mechanics required to sustain that in the ancient world.
Exactly. How do you feed them? How do you deal with the waste?
You need a flawless logistical network. Massive state-run granaries importing food from across the empire. A dedicated bureaucracy managing the intricate canal systems, not just for irrigation, but for sanitation and freshwater distribution within the city walls.
And a highly organized judicial system to manage the conflicts of a deeply diverse population of native citizens, foreign merchants, and displaced captives. Nebuchadnezzar managed all of this while simultaneously funding the most ambitious construction projects in human history.
His architecture was designed purely for psychological intimidation and awe. Take the Ishtar Gate, the main northern entrance to the city. It wasn't just a wooden door.
No, it was a massive structure.
14 meters high, completely covered in brilliant glazed blue bricks. In a landscape of brown mud and yellow desert, this towering blue structure would have been blinding.
And on these blue bricks were alternating reliefs of wild bulls and the Mushu.
The dragon.
Right, a terrifying mythological dragon with a snake's head, feline front legs, and bird talons, symbolizing Marduk. If you were a foreign diplomat or a conquered captive walking through the Ishtar Gate, the psychological message was clear. You are entering a realm of unimaginable wealth and absolute divine power. Submit.
From the gate, you walk down the processional way, a wide, paved avenue flanked by roaring lion motifs leading directly to the Edom and Enki.
The great ziggurat of Marduk.
A Greek historian Herodotus claimed it was 7 stories tall, reaching nearly 90 meters into the sky. It was an artificial mountain of baked brick, designed to physically connect earth and heaven.
Its sheer, arrogant scale is almost certainly the historical basis for the biblical myth of the Tower of Babel.
Yet, among all these heavily documented architectural triumphs, the most famous structure associated with Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon presents historians with a massive, glaring paradox.
The Hanging Gardens.
The Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. And yet, it might be history's biggest ghost story.
The legend is well known, primarily propagated by later Greek and Roman writers. They claim Nebuchadnezzar built this astonishing, terraced, elevated garden for his Median wife, Amytis.
Because she missed the lush green mountains of her homeland.
Right, she was depressed by the flat, arid plains of Babylon. So to cure her homesickness, Nebuchadnezzar constructed an artificial vaulted mountain covered in exotic trees and flowers, irrigated by complex machinery so the plants appeared to hang in midair.
It is a stunning romantic image, but there is a massive plot hole in this story from the source material. The Babylonian administrative archives from Nebuchadnezzar's reign are incredibly detailed.
We have his royal inscriptions boasting about every single wall, palace, and temple he ever restored.
We even have mundane clay tablets detailing the daily rations of grain handed out to the palace gardeners. Yet in all of these thousands of original contemporary documents, there is zero mention of a hanging garden.
And furthermore, over a century of aggressive archaeological excavation at the site of Babylon has yielded absolutely no physical evidence of a foundation capable of supporting such massive hydraulic engineering.
It creates a severe historical problem. Did the Greeks entirely invent a wonder of the world?
For decades, scholars assumed it was just a romantic fiction. But a British Assyriologist named Stephanie Daly put forward a brilliant, paradigm-shifting theory based on a rigorous retranslation of ancient texts.
And what's the theory?
Daly argues that the Hanging Gardens absolutely existed, but they were not in Babylon, and they were not built by Nebuchadnezzar.
Wait, so the most famous thing about Babylon might actually belong to the guy who tried to wipe Babylon off the map.
Exactly. She argues they were built in Nineveh by Sennacherib.
The irony is profound.
Daly points to Sennacherib's own cuneiform inscriptions. Sennacherib explicitly boasts about building an unrivaled palace at Nineveh, alongside a massive, elevated botanical garden.
He describes importing foreign plants and building terraced stonework.
Most importantly, he describes the invention of a complex, bronze, water-raising mechanism.
Let's look at the mechanics of that. To water a terraced mountain in the blazing sun, you can't just have guys carrying buckets. You need a continuous flow of water against gravity. Daly argues Sennacherib's texts describe an early version of the Archimedes screw.
A massive spiral encased inside a hollow cylinder. When you place the bottom end in the river and rotate the entire mechanism, the spiral scoops up a discrete pocket of water. As it continues to turn, that pocket of water is mechanically pushed up the incline until it pours out the top.
It is a brilliant piece of hydraulic engineering that allowed the Assyrians to continuously irrigate a multi-tiered garden.
So how did everyone get it wrong? How did an Assyrian engineering marvel get credited to Babylon?
It was a result of historical conflation by later Greek writers, right?
Exactly. By the time the Greeks were compiling their lists of the wonders of the world centuries later, Nineveh had been long destroyed and largely forgotten. Babylon, however, had achieved a mythical, legendary status in the Greek consciousness as the ultimate symbol of Mesopotamian grandeur.
So they simply took the greatest engineering legend of the region and grafted it onto the most famous city and its most famous king.
It is mind-blowing that the defining image of Babylon actually belonged to its greatest enemy.
But while the gardens might be a case of mistaken identity, Babylon's impact on human theology during this period is fiercely documented. Because while Nebuchadnezzar was building his megacity, he was aggressively expanding his empire westward. And that put his armies on a collision course with the kingdom of Judah.
Judah, with its capital in Jerusalem, was geopolitically trapped between the Babylonian superpower to the north and the ancient power of Egypt to the south.
The kings of Judah repeatedly rebelled against Babylonian hegemony, often relying on empty promises of Egyptian military aid.
Nebuchadnezzar, realizing that Judah was a perpetual liability on his frontier, decided to neutralize the threat permanently.
In 586 BCE, the Babylonian army lays siege to Jerusalem. It is a brutal 30-month blockade that results in horrific starvation within the city walls. When they finally breach the walls, the destruction is absolute.
They burn the city, they completely raze Solomon's temple to the ground.
And Nebuchadnezzar makes a terrifying example of the Judean king Zedekiah. They capture him, they execute his sons right in front of him, and then they physically blind him, guaranteeing that the murder of his children is the last image his brain ever records.
Then, Nebuchadnezzar executes a standard but devastating imperial policy. He forcibly deports the elite of Judah, the royal court, the priests, the scholars, the wealthy merchants, and the skilled artisans, and marches them hundreds of miles across the desert to Babylon.
This is the Babylonian exile.
And it triggered the most profound existential and theological crisis in the history of the Abrahamic faiths.
Put yourself in the mindset of an exiled Judean. Your entire theological framework is built on the premise that you are God's chosen people, living in the promised land, and worshiping at the one singular temple where God physically resides.
And now your temple is ash, your king is blinded, and you are enslaved in the capital of a foreign empire that worships a god named Marduk.
The cognitive dissonance is shattering. The obvious conclusion for anyone in the ancient world would be, our God lost, Marduk is stronger.
Historically, when ancient peoples faced this level of absolute defeat, they simply assimilated into the culture and religion of their conquerors. They disappeared. But the Jewish exiles, led by the intellectual and spiritual leadership of prophets like Ezekiel and Jeremiah, performed a miraculous theological pivot.
They completely reframed the disaster.
They argued that their God wasn't defeated. Instead, their God was so universally powerful that he was actually controlling Nebuchadnezzar.
God used the Babylonian army as a massive instrument of divine punishment because the people of Judah had strayed from their covenant.
It is a brilliant, paradigm-shifting rationalization. It transforms the absolute worst catastrophe in their history into proof of their God's ultimate omnipotent sovereignty over all nations.
But the practical problem remained. How do you practice a religion centered around animal sacrifice at a specific temple when you no longer have a temple?
You have to invent a portable religion. And this is where modern Judaism is forged in the fires of Babylon. They realize they don't need a physical building in Jerusalem to communicate with the divine.
They can gather in small groups anywhere in the world to pray, study, and read texts. They invent the concept of the synagogue.
Furthermore, surrounded by the overwhelming, dazzling, highly persuasive polytheistic culture of Babylon, the Jewish scholars realized they needed to solidify their identity before it dissolved. They began a massive, frantic effort to compile, edit, and physically write down their oral histories, their laws, and their prophecies.
The Torah, the foundational text of the Hebrew Bible, largely crystallizes into its current form during this exile.
They transitioned from merely believing their God is the best God to declaring absolute monotheism. There is only one God, and all others are fictions.
But what's really surprising when you look at the archaeological records from Babylon, like the Murashu family archives, is that the exile wasn't a constant state of brutal chain gang slavery. The Babylonians were practical. They integrated the exiles into their economy.
Yes, the administrative tablets reveal that Judeans were permitted to own land, engage in commerce, and even hold minor civic positions. They became deeply integrated into the economic fabric of Babylon.
In fact, they became so successful that decades later, when they were officially permitted to return to Jerusalem, a significant portion of the Jewish population chose to stay in Babylon because they had built prosperous lives there.
And living in Babylon meant they were deeply exposed to Babylonian intellectual and cultural traditions. You can see the massive fingerprints of Mesopotamian culture in the texts they wrote during this period.
For example, the biblical story of Noah and the flood bears striking, undeniable structural similarities to the much older flood narrative found in the Babylonian epic of Gilgamesh.
The Jewish scholars absorbed these dominant cultural narratives, but brilliantly repurposed them, stripping out the chaotic polytheism and injecting their strict monotheistic morality.
Because of this profound trauma and ideological conflict, the very name Babylon mutated. It ceased to be just a city and became an immortal symbol. In the biblical book of Revelation, authored centuries later, the writer uses Babylon the Great as a coded metaphor for the oppressive Roman Empire.
And that metaphor stuck. During the Protestant Reformation, leaders like Martin Luther used the imagery of the whore of Babylon to attack the systemic corruption of the Catholic Church.
In the 20th century, the Rastafari movement utilized Babylon to describe the oppressive, colonialist, and capitalist systems of the Western world. The physical city disappeared, but its name became the universal shorthand for human arrogance and systemic corruption.
But while religion gave Babylon its infamous legacy, it was the Babylonian scholars who quietly laid the foundations for the modern world. Beyond the theology, the exiles and the cultures that followed absorbed Babylonian science, specifically their highly advanced mathematics.
Which brings us back to the watch on your wrist, the base 60 system. Why on earth did they choose 60?
They chose it because of its profound mathematical elegance, especially in an era before calculators or the concept of decimals. Look at the number 10, the base of our modern system. It is computationally rigid.
You can only divide 10 evenly by 1, 2, 5, and 10.
Exactly. If you try to divide 10 by 3, you get 3.33 repeating infinitely. It's messy. But 60 is a highly composite number. It can be divided evenly by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 20, and 30.
If you are an ancient administrator dividing a plot of land into thirds or quarters, or a merchant calculating a complex fractional trade, the base 60 system allows you to do the math cleanly, using whole numbers without leaving remainders. It is incredibly efficient.
And its true power is unleashed in geometry. The Babylonians realized that if you divide a circle into 360 degrees, a multiple of 60, you can cleanly divide that circle into incredibly precise fractional segments.
This geometrical mastery is perfectly illustrated by a small clay tablet known as Plimpton 322, currently at Columbia University.
Plimpton 322 is mind-bending. When historians of mathematics finally decoded it in 1945, they found rows of cuneiform numbers. But they weren't just random tallies, they were complex lists of Pythagorean triples.
For clarity, a Pythagorean triple is a set of 3 integers that satisfy the equation for a right-angled triangle, like a 3-4-5 triangle. Understanding this allows you to calculate the precise length of the diagonal of a rectangle, which is essential for advanced architecture and surveying.
And the absolute kicker is the date. Plimpton 322 dates to roughly 1800 BCE.
The Babylonians were actively utilizing the mathematical principles of the Pythagorean theorem a full 1,200 years before Pythagoras was even born.
They were solving complex quadratic and cubic equations. They were calculating compound interest formulas for temple loans.
And they took this abstract mathematical genius and applied it to the night sky. The Babylonian priests believed the movements of the planets were coded messages from the gods.
To decipher the messages, they needed perfect data. So for centuries, generation after generation of priests meticulously recorded the exact positions of Venus, Jupiter, Mars, Mercury, and Saturn. They created the longest, unbroken astronomical data set in the ancient world.
Because they had hundreds of years of continuous data, they began to see the massive hidden algorithms of the solar system. They realized that sky wasn't random. They became so mathematically precise that they could accurately predict lunar eclipses months in advance.
Imagine the political power of a priest who can walk into the king's throne room and say, in 3 months, on this exact day, the moon will turn blood red. And then it happens. It looks like pure divine magic, but it's just rigorous applied mathematics.
To organize this massive map of the sky, they needed a coordinate system. So they utilized their base 60 geometry. They divided the apparent path of the sun, the ecliptic, into 12 equal sections of 30 degrees each.
They assigned a specific constellation to each 30-degree sector: Aries, Taurus, Gemini, and so forth. They invented the zodiac.
Now, in the modern world, when someone mentions the zodiac, we immediately think of checking a horoscope to see if we're compatible with a Taurus. But that is completely missing the point of what the Babylonians engineered.
Correct. The original zodiac was not a tool for personal astrology. It was a highly rigorous mathematical reference frame. It was an ancient GPS system for the sky. It allowed an astronomer to say Jupiter is currently at 15 degrees in the sector of Taurus, and another astronomer, hundreds of miles away, would know the exact coordinate being referenced.
And this mathematical and astronomical framework was so incredibly accurate, so undeniable, that centuries later, when the Greeks encountered it, they simply adopted it. It formed the absolute bedrock of Greek astronomy.
It was later preserved and expanded by Islamic scholars in Baghdad, and eventually filtered into Europe to ignite the scientific revolution. It is a direct intellectual lineage from a muddy ziggurat to the algorithms that land rovers on Mars.
So how does an empire this intellectually advanced, with walls thick enough to raise chariots on, and a logistical network feeding hundreds of thousands of people, simply end? It is one of the most fascinating collapses in history because it was entirely bloodless. It fell from within.
Following Nebuchadnezzar's death, Babylon suffers a string of weak rulers until a man named Nabonidus seizes the throne. And Nabonidus makes a fatal, inexplicable error in his political calculus. He develops a religious obsession with the moon god, Sin, and begins to actively elevate Sin over Marduk.
In any other Mesopotamian city, elevating a different god might cause friction, but in Babylon, it was geopolitical suicide. Marduk wasn't just a god, he was the source of the king's legal legitimacy.
The priests of the Isagila temple controlled the wealth of the empire. By alienating the priesthood of Marduk, Nabonidus actively dismantled the central pillar of his own regime stability.
And then he compounds this error with an act of staggering negligence. He literally leaves the capital. Nabonidus moves his royal court to a remote oasis town called Taima, deep in the Arabian desert, leaving his untested son, Belshazzar, to manage Babylon. And he stays in the desert for 10 years.
A 10-year absence breaks the fundamental social contract. Crucially, because the king was absent, the massive Akitu New Year festival could not be performed. The king had to physically grasp the hands of Marduk's statue to renew his divine mandate to rule.
By halting the festival for a decade, Nabonidus broadcast to the entire population that he despised their traditions and their god. He hollowed out the state from the inside, breeding toxic resentment.
And while Babylon rots internally, a new, unprecedented superpower is massing in the east. The Persian Empire, led by a military and political savant, Cyrus the Great.
In 539 BCE, Cyrus marches his army to the gates of Babylon. But Cyrus is a pragmatist. He looks at the massive fortifications built by Nebuchadnezzar and realizes a direct assault is impossible.
A siege would take years, as the city had massive internal agricultural reserves, and the Euphrates River ran directly through the center of the city, providing an inexhaustible water supply.
So Cyrus executes an engineering masterstroke. He realizes the river isn't just a water source, it's a vulnerability. Upstream from the city walls, his engineers engage in a massive excavation project. Under the cover of darkness, they breach the banks of the Euphrates and divert the main flow of the river into an enormous adjacent marshland.
Meanwhile, inside the city walls, Belshazzar is famously hosting a massive feast. This is the historical setting for the biblical story of the writing on the wall. The Babylonian elite feel completely secure behind their impregnable walls.
But outside, where the river passes under the defensive grates of the city, the water level begins to drop. It drops from a raging torrent to waist-deep, then knee-deep, until it is just a muddy stream.
And Cyrus's heavy infantry simply wades into the mud, walks right under the massive, impenetrable walls, and enters the city. The greatest fortress in the ancient world falls without a significant battle.
But it is what Cyrus does after he enters the city that earns him the title, the Great. He restrains his army. There is no massacre, no burning of temples, no looting.
Instead, Cyrus immediately initiates a brilliant campaign of psychological warfare and propaganda. He understands the resentment the Babylonians hold against their absent king.
He markets himself not as a foreign conqueror, but as a liberator. We know his exact messaging because we found the Cyrus cylinder, a clay artifact buried under the walls of Babylon.
On this cylinder, written in perfect Babylonian cuneiform, Cyrus declares that Marduk himself was disgusted by the heresy of Nabonidus, and that Marduk personally invited Cyrus into the city to restore proper religious order.
It is essential to contextualize the Cyrus cylinder. Today, organizations like the United Nations often parade it as the world's first charter of human rights. That is a deeply flawed, modern projection.
Cyrus was not inventing universal human rights. He was executing standard Mesopotamian statecraft. It was a long-standing tradition for a new king to declare a release of debts or a return of exiles to pacify a newly conquered population.
He was replacing angry, rebellious slaves with grateful, loyal taxpayers. He decrees that all the captive peoples deported by Babylon, including the Jews, are free to return to their homelands and rebuild their temples.
This geopolitical maneuver was so effective that the Jewish authors of the Bible literally gave Cyrus the title of Messiah, the Anointed One.
With Cyrus's bloodless conquest, the era of Babylon as an independent imperial superpower was permanently over. It was absorbed as an incredibly wealthy, vital province of the massive Persian Empire. The physical city continued to thrive economically for a time, but the political gravity had shifted east.
The physical city had one final chance at glory centuries later, when Alexander the Great conquered the Persian Empire in 321 BCE. Alexander was mesmerized by Babylon. He wanted to make it the absolute center of his new global empire.
He ordered the massive ziggurat to be cleared and rebuilt. He planned massive new ports. But then, in 323 BCE, Alexander suddenly contracts a fever and dies right there in Nebuchadnezzar's old palace. He was only 32.
Following Alexander's death, his generals ruthlessly carved up his empire. The region fell to a general named Seleucus. Seleucus made a pragmatic, logistical decision. He didn't want his capital in an ancient, decaying city.
He built a brand new, modern capital nearby named Seleucia and actively diverted trade routes to it. He even transported building materials from Babylon to build the new city.
It was a fatal drain. Without the royal court, without the concentrated wealth of the administration, the lifeblood of Babylon evaporated. The priests eventually stopped writing cuneiform, the massive ziggurat crumbled into a mountain of mud, the canals silted up.
The greatest city of the ancient world was slowly buried by the desert sands, becoming nothing more than a series of strange, undulating mounds.
And it remained buried for over 2,000 years. It wasn't until the turn of the 20th century that archaeologists like Robert Coldway began the massive task of unearthing the foundations of the Ishtar Gate and the palaces.
But even in its ruined state, modern geopolitics wouldn't leave it alone. Saddam Hussein built a garish, modern palace right on top of the ancient ruins, aggressively altering the archaeological integrity of the site to connect himself to Nebuchadnezzar's legacy.
And then, during the 2003 Iraq War, the U.S. military established a massive base directly on the ruins, driving heavy armored vehicles over 4,000-year-old brick pavements and filling sandbags with archaeological debris. It took until 2019 for the site to finally receive UNESCO World Heritage status to offer it some genuine protection.
The physical history of Babylon is a profound tragedy. It is a cautionary tale of imperial hubris reduced to mud. But focusing on the physical ruins misses the entire point of the source material. Babylon never truly fell.
So what does this all mean? Its physical shell collapsed, but its internal operating system simply detached and went invisible.
Every time a modern democracy drafts a constitution demanding that the ruler is subject to the written law, that is Hammurabi. Every time we divide a circle into 360 degrees to navigate a ship or plot a satellite trajectory, that is the Babylonian priesthood. Every time we engage with the rigorous monotheism and portable theology of the Abrahamic faiths forged in the trauma of the exile, we are interacting with the ghost of Babylon.
The city engineered the conceptual frameworks we still use to measure reality, enforce justice, and understand the divine. They achieved an immortality that no stone wall or bronze gate could ever provide.
Which leaves us with a truly fascinating question to consider. The source material asks, how long does a civilization last? The answer is that it lasts as long as its ideas are useful to its conquerors. It makes you wonder, 4,000 years from now, when our skyscrapers are just mounds of dirt, what invisible base 60 system of ours will the people of the future be using every single day without having any idea where it came from? Thank you for taking this deep dive with us.